Welcome back to Baking School with Jami. All right, scones are such a delight. They're an item that most people no longer know how to make at home. And so your only chance to get a truly delicious scone is by going to a bakery to get one. But scones make the perfect breakfast, a fun snack, or a useful treat for hospitality served alongside some coffee or tea. And once you know how to make a basic scone, the world opens up for you because you can make sweet or savory scones. The options are almost limitless. Okay, let's dive into scone making today. If you need a refresher, make sure to head back and go through the first 3 lessons of baking school. We covered the equipment and tools you need to become an awesome home baker in lesson 1, the different types of flours and when to use them in lesson 2, and then an intro and tips for making the best quick breads in lesson number 3. Now we're jumping into making scones. I'm gonna give you some tips and we will get to an awesome recipe. As a reminder, before we get into it, you can head over to bakingschoolwithjami.com to access all the printables and the recipes for free that we cover in every single lesson. Every lesson we come up with a fantastic, simple recipe to cook that goes along with that lesson, which of course means we're making scones today. That makes sense and is gonna be awesome. So watch until the end of this lesson because we're gonna learn how to make fantastic but simple cream scones. Now, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode of Baking School with Jami. In the last lesson, we learned how to make biscuits, the American kind, not the British cookie. We made American biscuits. Today we're looking at the biscuit's cousin, the scone. Now, biscuits tend to be savory, and they usually rely on butter to get those really well-defined layers that we love so much in biscuits. Scones tend to be sweet, although I do love a good savory scone, and they have a delightful crumbly crust thanks to the eggs and often the cream that are inside. And the classic cream scone we're making today is very much the British version of scones. Americans tend to play fast and loose with our definition of scones, and you'll find more pastry-like dense versions of scones in many recipes, lots of different flavors. Scones can vary wildly in their dough and just how they are. So today we're gonna be making kind of a classic scone. Okay, so here are my tips for the perfect scone. Number 1, use cold butter. The colder, the better. This is the absolute secret that will change your scone making forever. In fact, you can even use frozen butter, and that is actually what I do most of the time. If you've ever had trouble with your scones kind of just bleeding and becoming a mess, you probably need frozen butter. A chilled bowl and even cold pastry cutters can also help. And this is why you use a pastry cutter. So it might seem easy to just kind of dig your hands in and break up that butter yourself and just kind of mix it all up, but you don't want anything that is going to heat up the butter. Let me see if I have my pastry cutter right here. Nope, it is buried somewhere. Okay, so I'll have to see if I can find it. Well, I'll have it for you when we do the recipes. But with a pastry cutter, you're gonna be able to go in and just cut up the butter without ever having to touch it. It'll cut it up all perfectly for you and you don't have to worry about it. Now, a really good tip also is to get frozen butter and grate it with a cheese grater. You're gonna get the perfect consistency that you don't even need to use a pastry cutter. Tip number 2 is do not overmix. It's tempting to keep mixing with scones. But remember in lesson 3 when I told you that quick breads don't want to be overmixed? This is a prime example. Your scone batter will look lumpy. That's okay. It's kind of more like pancake batter with the lumps in it. Totally fine. They're meant to be there. Tip number 3 is pop them in the fridge before baking. If it's really warm in your house while you're baking or your oven isn't quite up to temperature yet, just pop those scones back in the fridge for a little while before you bake. This allows it to all cool down again before baking. It gets your butter nice and cold, and it can be a great way to help prevent your scones from kind of bleeding and getting too mushy. Just pop them back in the fridge. Next tip is to be careful not to overbake. This is what I do all the time, or at least I'm trying to get better at. It's tempting with scones to overbake them, but you actually want them very soft and easy to break. Overcooking is a very common problem with scones. It leads to drier ones, burnt on the bottom. The top looks great and the bottom's all burnt, so you do not want to overcook. take them out before you think it's actually quite time. All right, my next tip is try grating the frozen butter. I forgot I had this as its whole own tip for you. So if you are really having a hard time getting that butter just right, this is a fantastic trick, and I do it probably about half the time. Take your butter, freeze it, and then get your cheese grater and just grate that cheese so that you end up with these little tiny flakes. All you do then is add those flakes into your bowl and you can just mix it then. You don't have to use a pastry cutter. And in fact, if you don't own a pastry cutter, this is a really, really easy way to do it because most of us have a little cheese grater that we can use. Okay, that's it for learning about scones. They're actually not that difficult. Now we need to actually make one and practice. Making scones just take a little bit of practice to kind of get that eye right on when they're done, when it's done mixing. If your first batch is terrible, don't fret, review these tips and try again. You will be a scone master in no time. So stick around with me for a few more minutes while we make the best scones ever, and then head over to bakingschoolwithjami.com to download the printable sheet from today's lesson and to download this recipe that we're about to cook together for free. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe so that you never miss a future episode of Baking School with Jami. And let's go ahead and get started on making the most amazing scones. Today we are making the most amazing simple scones. I'm gonna be making two different recipes side by side, whole grain spelt scones and white flour scones. You're gonna see how easy these are really to mix together. All we're doing is putting the dry ingredients together, some baking powder, salt, your flour, and we're gonna mix them up. Then I'm using dried blueberries for this recipe. Scones are so fun because you can add in your own mix-ins. You could put chocolate chips, anything you want. And then the secret to scones is to use really cold cream because that's what's gonna really help give them that wonderful kind of flake. And scones are so easy. All we're doing is mixing them together, and you're gonna notice that scones have a much drier dough. We're not looking for a super wet batter like you would with muffins. You can tell it's actually fairly dry, which is what gives scones like that delightful texture, crumminess. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm shaping them real fast, touch it as least as possible, but I'm shaping them real fast just into circles and then cutting those into those wedges. And then you wanna separate them out just a tiny bit, give a little ½ inch or so between the pieces so they're not touching. I'm gonna do the same thing here with my spelt ones that I'm doing, and I was rearranging them so I could fit them all on. And that's it. That is how fast and easy it is to make scones. We're gonna do a little bit of cream on top, and we're gonna sprinkle on some sugar then to give it just this nice little topping, which is totally optional, but they're very delicious when you do that. And then we bake them. Scones make the best treat to be able to serve for hospitality, make it with some coffee, bring it to a friend, and you can have the most amazing but very, very simple scones that are so delicious. Check out how easy these were and just how amazing they turned out, and they're super, super simple.